all know, database management system is one of the most popular concept to go for understanding your data and managing your data. In that part, we have a concept called ER diagram. That is nothing but entity relationship diagram. The diagram is basically going to help you to make your database structure. So in this tutorial, we are going to talk about what is ER diagram and how can you implement this concept in your own database management system. The companies like Ola, Uber, and maybe not even need to specify the company name, all the company has their own database management system. So as it's a very popular concept, to keep that in our mind, we came up with this tutorial. But before start the tutorial, let me introduce that Great Learning has come up with the idea that is Great Learning Academy, where you will get almost 80 plus free courses, and after complete your course, you can claim your certificate as well. And if you want to do these courses in your mobile application, that is also possible using Great Learning app. So let's get started with the tutorial. Now we are going to talk about ER diagram in SQL. But what is ER diagram? Let's have a look at what is ER diagram and how we are going to use these concepts, right? So let's go to the next part. So what is ER diagram? A ER diagram is basically an entity relationship model, which is in short known as ER model. It helps to describe the structure of a particular database with the help of a diagram. Yes, it's like a diagram. That is known as entity relationship diagram, or in short ER diagram. Right? So now we are going to talk about what is ER diagram, how this diagram is actually going to help us to make our databases, right? Is it interesting? I know it's an interesting part, and if you have a good knowledge on this part, yes, database is all in your hand, right? Now we are going to talk about how this ER diagram came into the picture. Basically, the history of ER diagram. So ER diagrams are a visual tool which is used to represent the ER model. It was invented by Peter Chain in 1971 to create a uniform convention which can also be used for relational database and network. He aimed to use an ER model as a conceptual modeling approach. So this is how ER diagram came into the picture in 1971 by Peter Chain. Now we are going to talk about some facts of ER diagram. So what are those facts? Let's have a look at that. ER model helps to draw database design. Obviously, it will help you to draw your database. It will help you to manage your database and have a blueprint of your database, right? It is an easy to display graphical tool for modeling data, mostly used in database design. It is a GUI. GUI means graphical user interface representation of the logical structure of a database, right? It assists you to identify the entities that exist in a system and the relationship between those entities. So these are the facts we get to know about ER diagram, right? Now we are going to talk about why ER diagram is used, right? So it helps to define the terms related to entity relationship modeling. But what is that actually stands for, right? We know some tables we make, the attributes we have. Yes, those table name, those attributes are the part of entity and attributes, right? It basically helps you to define a total database using those entity name and using those attributes. In the later in the section, we are going to talk about what are those entities. So basically in the first part of this tutorial, we have learned about what is SQL, how you can use the SQL, why do we need keys, what is relational database management systems, and also we have talked about tables, attributes. Now we are going to do the same thing using the term of ER diagram, because if you have a good knowledge on ER diagram, then you can start making the blueprint of your database, and then you can go for putting your data into the database, right? First, you need to know what is database, how you can make your first database, how can you start using those tables. Then we come to the ER diagram in a late version, right? Why? Because if you don't know what is table, if I start talking, hey, we are going to talk about entity. Do you understand? No, right? So first, as you know, these table names are basically the entities. We are going to talk about that as well. Then the attributes is also there, and how can you start making the relationship between attributes and tables and entities? We will see that as well. Right? So it's basically helps to describe entities, attributes, relationships, obviously, and ER diagrams are convertible into relational tables, the tables we know, right? That allows to build a database easily. So if you know how to make a ER diagram, if you know how to make a relationship between your entities or attributes, yes, to make your database is very easy with ER diagram. ER diagram are used as a blueprint for implementing data in specific software applications. So basically we can say ER diagrams are the blueprint of your database, right? Now we are going to talk about what the components we have in ER diagram. I told you that we already, whatever we have learned so far, we are going to use those techniques only, right? But in the case of ER diagram, we are going to use some concepts or some names, right? Okay, so now let's have a look at what are the basic terms and most used concepts we have in ER diagram. We have entities, attributes and relationships, right? So each of them we will look about this, what is entities, what is attributes and what is relationship as well. I hope this tutorial is going to help you to understand SQL or a whole database system end to end, right? And please do let us know in the comment what you feel about this tutorial as well, right? Now we are going to talk about what is entity. So entity defines the object or real world objects like place, person, object, event or a concept that stores data in the database, right? I am very in confusion that what is entity, right? Okay, let me give you an example and define you what is entities. Suppose you are talking about a person, employee, student, patient, they are your entities. If you talk about if you talk about places, then store and buildings is your entity. And if you talk about the object, then machine, product, car, bike will be your entity, right? For the case of event, sale, registration, renewal will be your entity. And the concepts like account, course, this will be your entities. So your entity will be like a place, person or an object, right? So when you make a student table and under that there will be lots of attributes. So your table name will be your entity, right? I hope it clears your doubt what is entity. Now we are going to talk about what is weak entity. So we have two types of entity. One is strong entity, one is weak entity. But what is the difference between strong and weak entity? We are going to talk about that as well. First, let's have a look at what is weak entity. So weak entity isn't one type of entity that will not have its key attributes, right? And also can be identified uniquely by considering the primary key of another entity. So by the name itself, it's gonna say, hey, I'm a weak entity, right? So it's not going to have a primary key or some strong key points, right? As it's a weak entity. Now, we are going to talk about what is the difference between strong entity set versus weak entity set. Yes, let's have a look at that. So for strong entity, you will always have a primary key. So as we all know that for our table to reduce the redundancy of the data, we try to use a primary key. Yes, so for a strong entity, you will always have a primary key. For your table, for your student table, you will have a student ID that will be your primary key, right? But in the case of weak entity, it does not have enough attributes to have a primary key. Your weak entity will not have a primary key. So, strong entity we represented by a rectangle symbol, right? And weak entity we represented by a double rectangle symbol, right? So, in the case of strong entity, it has a primary key represented by the underline symbol. Okay, in the case of weak entity, it has a partial key which is represented by a dashed underline symbol. So these are the symbols we use in ER diagram to understand our entities and attributes as well. So these are the syntaxes we have and we will look into that as well, right? The member of a strong entity set is known as dominant entity set. As you can see, the strong entity always will be a dominant entity set. The member of a weak entity set is always known as a subordinate entity set. As it's a weak entity, you can say, hey, it's a subordinate entity set, right? The primary key is one of its attributes which helps to identify its member, right? And in the case of weak entity, in a weak entity set, it is a combination of primary key and partial key of the strong entity set, right? So these are the main difference we can see when we talk about strong entity and weak entity. right? I hope you understand the difference between strong entity and the weak entity. And again, if you have any doubt, please do let us know in the comment section. We will be glad to solve your doubts, right? Now we are going to talk about what is attributes. Attributes is basically stand for single valued field or property of either an entity type or a relationship type. Wait, what are you saying? I don't get it. Let me just define you what is attributes. So when we talk about a table called student table, might have different attributes. We quite talk about these attributes, right? The student name, student ID, and the student phone number, and many more, right? The columns, basically, the column you will have in a table, that is basically stands for attributes. So attributes can stand for a single valued field, obviously, and property of either an entity type or a relationship type. So this is how we define our attributes. Now we are going to talk about the types of attributes we have. Yes, we have lots of type of attributes. Okay, so there are 4 types of attributes are there: simple attributes, composite attributes, derived attribute, and multivalued attribute. Now, so we are going to talk about the 4 types of attributes are there, right? What are those 4 attributes? One is simple attribute, second one is composite attribute, third one is derived attribute, and the fourth one is multi-valued attribute. Now we will go and have a look at what are these types of attributes and how can you differentiate them, right? And with the example. So let's start with simple attributes. What is simple attributes? Simple attributes is basically do not divide it further. How can I divide an attribute, right? Okay, let me give you an example. So suppose we have a table called student table. And from the student table, we have different types of attributes: student name, student ID, and student phone number. So if you look at it, student phone number cannot be divided further, obviously. So in this case, attribute student phone number will be the simple attributes. So your attributes cannot be divided further, right? I hope you understand the concepts of simple attributes. Yes, there are some attributes when you actually define your attributes, you have to keep that in mind. What are the attributes I am defining? I'm defining a simple attribute or some other type of attributes, right? Now we are going to talk about what is composite attribute. Composite attributes, from the name itself, you can say it can be divided further, right? How can I divide an attribute? So I am going to say a student table. If a student table might have a different attributes like student name, student ID, and student phone number. So from these attributes, we can say student name can be divided further. How a student name can be divided further? Yes, you can have first name, middle name, and last name, right? So you can have 3 types, 3 parts in your name. So yeah, you can divide your name to a first name, middle name, and last name. So your attributes is a composite attribute, right? So this is the main difference between simple attributes and composite attributes. So simple attributes cannot be divided further, whereas the composite attributes can be divided further. Now we are going to talk about what is derived attributes. Derived attributes does not include in the physical database directly. Their values are derived from the other attributes present in the database. I mean, it's so confusing, right? No, it's not. Let me give you an example on that. Suppose again we have a table called student table. There we have some attributes which are the columns: student name, student ID, student phone number, and student date of birth. But I want the student age. How can I get that? From the date of birth itself, you can derive the age. Yes, this is how the derived attributes comes. So if you want to get the age of that particular student, you can calculate it from the date of birth from that students. Yes, so these are the 3 types of attributes we have looked so far. Now we are going to talk about the multi-valued attributes. Multi-valued attributes, from its name itself, you can understand. We can say the attributes can have multiple values. But how can you handle a multiple, like an attribute with a multiple values? Wait, let me just tell you how can you do that. Again, the same table we have student name, student ID, student phone number, and student DOB. And can you say this phone number can be multiple, right? I also have a 3 numbers, 3 contact number, right? Anyone can more than one contact number, right? Yes, so your student contact number will be your multiple, right? And it will be a multi-valued attributes, right? A quick recap of the types of attributes we have. Simple attributes, It's a simple, it cannot divide it further. Composite attribute, yes, you can divide it further. Maybe your name, 3 parts in your name. Derived attributes, the proper attributes will not be there in your table. You can derive it from some columns, right? Next comes multivalued attributes. Multivalued attributes is basically a attribute will can hold a multiple value for a single data, right? So this is the 4 types of attributes we have. So, I mean, can you even think of from a table columns itself, there are lots of types are there, right? When you know what are these columns, what are the tables, that time if I can say, hey, look at these things, there are lots of types are there. That time you can understand, okay, these are the types of attributes can be there. Okay, but before if we start with ER diagram, you will total confuse and you will say, hey, I'm not able to understand anything. So always start with the simple understanding of SQL, understand what is table, what are columns, how can you use the primary key, foreign key, right? The key concepts we have, and then go for understanding this ER diagram. Again, ER diagram is the basic one. When we go for the proper procedure of making a database, you first need to have a blueprint. You need to understand the ER diagram. You need to say, hey, these are the relation I want to make in my database, and then you will go and create your database, right? But we are doing it little late to understand these things quite properly. Okay, now we will talk about cardinality. What is cardinality? So it helps to define the relationship between the entities. Okay, what type of a relationship? Yes, we are going to talk about that as well. So types of cardinality we have: one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship. Basically, we have 4 types of cardinality, right? Many-to-one and many-to-many. So we have some symbols as well. By the symbols we can represent, okay, these are the types of cardinality we have from this to this entity, right? So let's have a look at one by one what are this cardinality and how these types are works. Now we are going to talk about what is one-to-one relationship. So one entity from set A can be only associated with one entity of set B and vice versa, right? How this gonna work? So suppose we have 2 table, okay, one entity or we have 2 entity. Let's talk about these terms with the ER diagram. So we have 2 entity, one is student, one is course, right? One student can go and register for different courses. If you look at it, a student can register, at least I can register for 5 different courses, but all those courses have a single line back to that one student, right? Courses can be, if your course, one particular course, right? One particular course ID, okay, for particularly one student, okay? So it cannot be, same course can be taken by the student as well, but just look at it, just a one course, right? And a course, that particular slot of the course is taken by a student, that cannot be taken by other student, right? So this is how this one-to-one relationship works. Okay, right. So your student can have can go for registering multiple courses, whereas one particular course can be assigned to one particular student, right? Now we are going to talk about what is one-to-many relationship. From the name itself, again, you can understand one entity from entity set A can be only associated with multiple entities of entity set B, but an entity from an entity set B can be associated with only one entity. Oh my god, this is so confusing. Let me just clear it out with you. So we have 2 entities called class and student, right? One class is consisting of multiple students, right? One-to-many relationship, okay? Only one class. Class is one, but student can be multiple. So this is how a class is connected with student with multiple many relationship. Okay, so this is how one-to-many relationship works. I know it is a bit confusing, but when you start working with this, you will start understanding how this one-to-one, one-to-many relationship works, and you will start making your entities with this relationship, right? Now we are going to talk about what is many-to-one relationship. Okay, just keep quiet and just try to understand what this definition wants to define us. So many-to-one relationship is basically the reverse of one-to-many. So what we have just seen of one-to-many. More than one entity from entity set A can be associated with only one entity of entity set B. But an entity from entity set B may or may not be associated with more than one entity from entity set A. I can understand this is confusing, but let me just give you an example again. So you have two entities, student and class. If you just give a closer look at it, you can say I just make these things reverse, right? So many students belongs to the same class, right? So many to one relationship. There are lots of students, but the class is one. Okay, this is how many to one relationship works. When you talk about one to many, that time you have class, and class have lots of students again. So one to many and many to one, right? Now we are going to talk about many to many relationship, vice versa, right? It's one to one and many to many. It's quite simple than many to one and one to many. Okay, so one entity from entity set A can be associated with more than one entity of entity set B and vice versa, right? For both the cases, they can have many relationship. Yes, so student and teacher will be your entity. A student as a group are associated with multiple teachers, and also teacher can be associated with multiple students. As simple. So a bunch of students can go to lots of teacher. A bunch of teachers can be associated with multiple students. This is how many to many relationship works. Now we will gonna take a simple example of ear diagram, and I will try to make you understand how this ear diagram is working, right? How you can do that. Let's have a look at that. So we have student, we have student ID, we have student name, student address. Then we have study, we have university ID, university name. Now just let's have the description of ear diagram. Student and university both are entities. If you can look at this diagram, student and universities are your entity. Now, if you look at the relationship between student and university is many to one, right? If you look at the relationship between student and university, right? One student, just look at this. As a university can have many students, but a student cannot study in multiple university at the same time. So this is how you are going to define the relationship between these two entities. So you can say, hey, university can have lots of students, obviously, it's a university. But a particular student cannot study in a multiple university at the same time, right? Attributes for student, student ID, student name, student address. It's attributes. So you got your entity, you got the relationship, you have the attributes for the student, like the entity you have, right? For now, the entity of university, you have university ID and university name. It's a very simple example of ear diagram. I can understand. But yes, this is how you need to start with ear diagram. So first we have looked at, the tables, the attributes, the primary key, the types of operators, and some, aggregated functions, order by, group by. We have learned everything. But now you are saying, hey, why you're actually going for ear diagram? Because when you have a proper idea about what are these, how can you manipulate your queries, subqueries, joins, but you don't know how to make the relationship. You just can start with just a random thoughts of tables and attributes and just writing your database. You cannot do that. You need to have a proper planning. Everything needs a proper planning, right? If you just try to make a building, right? That time also you need to make a blueprint. We all do that. So in the case of database, when you are making a building for the database, right, it's like a building itself. It's a base, right? So you need to have a proper planning and you need to have a proper blueprint, right? Yes. So this is how this ER diagram is basically one of the most important part of database. Now we are going to talk about some components, how we are going to symbolize them, right? So when we use rectangle, it's represent entity sets. When we use ellipses, it's a attributes. If you use diamond, it's a relationship set. If you use lines, they link attributes to entity sets and entity sets to relationship set. Now it comes double ellipses, multivalued attributes, as we talk about multivalued attributes, then dashed ellipses, that is basically derived attributes, then double rectangles, that weak entity sets. Yes, I just want to say, hey, this is a weak entity. Then double lines. total participation of an entity in a relationship set, right? Your total entity in a relationship set. Okay, so these are the components and these are the symbol we use. Now let's have a just quick look at the whole like diagram we just looked so far. Then entity, there is two types, weak and strong entity. Attribute, you have key, composite, multivalued, derived, right? Simple attributes. And then we have relationship. So relationship we have one to one, obviously one to one, one to many to one, and many to many, right? This is a quick look of whole year model, right? So we have understood about year model. In this tutorial, we have learned about what is entity relationship diagram in database management system and what are the concepts you need to know for this particular ER diagram and how can you implement them in your own database management system as well. I think this tutorial is going to help you, and please do let us know in the comment section what do you think about this tutorial. And also let me introduce that Great Learning has came up with the idea that is Great Learning Academy, where you will get almost 80 plus free courses, and after complete your course you can claim your certificate as well. And if you want to do this course in your mobile application, that is also possible using Great Learning app. Thank you so much.